Hello. Today I will tell you a fascinating story, rich in lessons and teachings that you may already know, but that is always worth revisiting, the story of Job. Let's learn together in this narrative full of twists and deep reflections. The story of Job is one of the most engaging and challenging tales in the Bible. Let's go to the most important topics in Job's life, so that we can understand each crucial moment of his trajectory. Introduction to Job. Job was a righteous, God-fearing man who was known for his integrity. He lived in the land of Uz and had great wealth and a large family. His life was marked by devotion and prosperity. Imagine a vast fertile land, where the fields stretch as far as the eye can see, filled with verdant pastures and countless herds. It is in the land of Uz that our story begins, a prosperous and peaceful region, known for its natural riches and mild climate. In this blessed land there lived a man named Job. From a young age, Job was known for his uprightness and fear of God. He was not only a religious man, but someone who lived out his faith with intensity and sincerity. His integrity was unquestionable, and he was respected by all who knew him. Every decision he made was marked by justice and kindness, reflecting his deep commitment to divine principles. Job was not only a godly man, but also extremely prosperous. His wealth was remarkable. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen and 500 donkeys. In addition, it had a large number of servants who worked on its land and took care of its flocks. In modern terms, we can say that Job was one of the richest men of his time, owner of a vast property and many possessions. His prosperity was not limited to material possessions. Job was blessed with a large family. He had 10 children, 7 sons and 3 females. His children were his greatest joy, and he cared for them with love and dedication. Each week, his sons gathered for feasts in their homes, and Job, concerned for their spiritual well-being, offered sacrifices to God after each feast, thinking, "Perhaps my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This was Job's level of devotion. Not only did he live a righteous life, but he also constantly interceded for his family. Job's life was an example of how devotion and righteousness can go hand in hand with prosperity. He was known and respected throughout the land of Uz, not only for his wealth but also for his wisdom and integrity. People from all over came to him for advice, and he was seen as a leader and a role model. But the story of Job, as we will see, is not just about prosperity and devotion. It is also a story of intense trials, of deep questioning, and ultimately of redemption and restoration. Job's life shows us that even the most righteous can face unimaginable hardships, but it also teaches us that faith and integrity can sustain us through the darkest of times. Let's continue our journey through Job's life and discover how this righteous man faced challenges that tested his faith to the limit. The prosperous life of Job. Job had 7 sons and 3 daughters, as well as immense possessions, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 donkeys. He also had many servants. Job was considered the richest man in the East. Now that we know a little about Job and his reputation as a righteous and God-fearing man, let's dive deeper into his prosperous life. Imagine a scenario of prosperity and abundance, where every corner of Job's estate reflects his immense wealth and blessings. Job was a man blessed with a large family. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, who were his pride and joy. His children, always united, liked to gather for celebrations and banquets. Each son, in turn, hosted a feast in his own home, and they made a point of including their sisters in these festivities. Harmony and family love were palpable in each of these meetings. In addition to family happiness, Job possessed immense wealth. His flock was vast and varied. He had 7,000 sheep that grazed on the green hills, producing wool for clothing and meat for food. 3,000 camels, animals of great value, were used for transport and trade, helping to move goods through the trade routes of the East. Job also owned 500 yoke of oxen, which were used to plow the land and ensure bountiful harvests. In addition, he had 500 donkeys, animals essential for agriculture and transportation. Job's vast estate was managed by many servants, each with his own specific responsibilities. Some tended the flocks, others worked the land, and many were responsible for keeping the house and preparing the feasts. Job treated his servants with justice and kindness, and they deeply respected him for it. Job's wealth was not limited to material possessions alone. He was a man of great influence and respect throughout the region. He was considered the richest man in the East, and his wisdom and generosity were known to all. People from all over came to seek his counsel and guidance, and he was always ready to help those in need. Job's fields were vast and fertile, producing bountiful crops year after year. His crops of wheat, barley, and other crops fed not only his family and servants, but also the community around him. Job was known for his generosity, often sharing his crops with the poor and needy. Job's house was a place of constant joy and celebration. Her sons and daughters, in their moments of celebration, always had music and dancing, and the house was filled with laughter and lively conversation. Job, with his heart full of gratitude, offered sacrifices to God regularly, interceding for his children and asking for blessings for his family. Despite all his wealth and prosperity, Job never strayed from his faith and devotion to God. He knew that all his blessings came from the Lord, and he kept his life centered on prayer and service to others. Job's prosperous life was a reflection of his integrity and faithfulness to God, showing that true wealth goes beyond material possessions. But as we will see in the next chapters of his story, this prosperity would be put to the test in unimaginable ways. Job's life, while blessed, was about to face challenges that would test his faith and character to the limit. Let's continue our journey and find out how Job dealt with the adversities that lay ahead. The Celestial Council. One day, the angels presented themselves before God, and Satan also appeared among them. God praised Job's righteousness, but Satan argued that Job was only faithful because he was being blessed with riches and an easy life. Now, imagine a completely different scenario, far beyond our earthly vision. In the heavenly realm, a grand event was about to occur. On a special day, the angels, powerful and glorious heavenly beings, presented themselves before God, gathered for a divine council. Each of them had a crucial role in the grand plan of the universe, and their presence there reflected the majesty and order of the celestial kingdom. Among these angelic beings, Satan also appeared, the adversary, the one who always seeks to test the faith and faithfulness of human beings. Although his presence was dark, he was allowed to stand before God. And so, a dialogue began that would change Job's fate in a profound and unexpected way. God, knowing the heart of every human being and knowing all things, asked Satan, "Where do you come from?" Satan answered, "To go through the earth and walk in it." It is important to remember that Satan was always looking for ways to challenge people's faith and loyalty to God. It was then that God, with great pride and confidence, spoke of Job, "Have you noticed my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is upright, righteous, God-fearing, and shuns evil." Job's mention of the heavenly council was a testimony to his exemplary faith and upright living. But Satan, always skeptical and ready to sow doubt, questioned Job's motives. He reasoned, "Does Job fear God for no reason? Didn't you put a fence around him, his family and everything he owns? You have blessed him with so much work and riches that his flock is scattered over the earth. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will certainly curse you to your face." Satan suggested that Job's faithfulness was directly linked to the blessings he received. He insinuated that if Job lost all his riches and comforts, his devotion would turn into revolt and a curse against God. It was a serious accusation, one that called into question Job's integrity and true faith. God, knowing Job's heart deeply and knowing his sincerity, accepted Satan's challenge. He said, "Very well, everything he has is in your hands, but don't touch his life." With this, God allowed Satan to test Job, but with a clear limit: Job's life was to be spared. This heavenly conversation set the stage for the events that would follow in Job's life. It was a moment of great tension and expectation. What would happen when the blessings were withdrawn? Would Job's faith withstand the adversities that were to come? And so, Job's prosperous life, which had once seemed unshakable, was about to be put to the test in unimaginable ways. From that moment on, Job's true test of faith and perseverance would begin, and his responses to trials would be a powerful lesson in faith and resilience for all future generations. Get ready to follow the next chapters of this fascinating story, where Job's devotion and integrity will be challenged to the extreme. First trial of Job. God allowed Satan to test Job, taking away everything he had, but without touching his health. In a single day, Job lost his sons, his servants, and all his possessions. Now, with the heavenly scene set, we descend back to earth, where Job, still oblivious to the dialogue between God and Satan, lived his life of devotion and prosperity. But everything was about to change abruptly and devastatingly. Imagine an ordinary day in Job's life where routine flowed through the fertile fields, servants performed their chores, and his children prepared for another of their joyful gatherings. On that day, however, something terrible was about to happen. Suddenly, a messenger came running to Job, panting and with a face marked with dread. He said, "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, when the Sabaeans attacked and took everything. They killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone escaped to bring you the news." Job barely had time to process this terrible news when another messenger arrived. The second messenger, equally terrified, reported, "Fire from God fell from heaven and burned the sheep and the servants, and I was the only one who escaped to tell you." The devastation was immense, and Job's wealth was being consumed by unimaginable disasters. But it was not yet the end of the bad news. Before the second messenger could finish speaking, a third messenger arrived, bringing more calamity. The Chaldeans formed 3 groups and attacked the camels, taking them away. They killed the servants with the sword, and only I managed to escape to tell you. Job, a man of immense patience and faith, was being bombarded with tragedy after one another. But the most devastating blow was yet to come. The fourth messenger arrived, with a countenance marked by grief and despair, and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the house of the elder brother, when a strong wind came from the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, which collapsed upon them, killing them all. I was the only one who managed to escape to bring him the news." In a single day, Job lost everything he owned. His flocks were destroyed, his servants killed, and worst of all, his beloved sons and daughters were taken from him in a tragic and sudden way. The pain and suffering that Job experienced at that time was unimaginable. In the face of such calamities, anyone could despair and lose faith. However, Job's response was deeply moving and full of faith. He stood up, tore his cloak as a sign of mourning, shaved his head, and prostrated himself on the ground in worship. And he said, "Naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord took away, blessed be the name of the Lord." Job did not sin, nor did he attribute any fault to God. His reaction was one of deep acceptance and reverence, acknowledging God's sovereignty over all things. He understood that everything he had was a gift from God, and even in his extreme loss, he chose to worship rather than curse. This first test of Job shows us the depth of his faith and the strength of his character. Even in the face of the greatest tragedy of his life, he maintained his integrity and trust in God. But this was only the first of many trials that Job would face. Let's continue to follow this incredible journey of faith, perseverance, and resilience. Job's response to tragedy. In the midst of grief and loss, Job tore his garments, shaved his head, and fell to the ground, worshiping God. He said, "The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away, blessed be the name of the Lord." Let us now delve into Job's response after facing a series of unimaginable tragedies. Picture the scene. Job, a man who had experienced a life of abundance and blessings, now finds himself at the center of complete devastation. He lost his beloved children, his loyal servants, and all his possessions in a single day. The pain Job felt was indescribable, something no parent should have to endure. In the face of this immense pain, Job was not paralyzed or succumbed to despair. His first reaction was to express his grief in the traditional manner of his time. Rending his garments was a sign of deep anguish and suffering, a gesture that showed the outside world the inner pain he was feeling. By shaving his further demonstrated the intensity of his grief, as this act symbolized humiliation and total loss. But Job did not stop there. After expressing his physical grief, he did something that would surprise many. He fell down on the ground, in worship of God. In the midst of his pain and suffering, Job chose to worship the Lord. This act of prostrating was a demonstration of reverence and submission to God, acknowledging his sovereignty in all things. And then, Job spoke words that resonate through the centuries: "Naked I came forth from my mother's womb, and naked shall I depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord took away, blessed be the name of the Lord." These words reveal the depth of Job's faith and wisdom. He recognized that everything he had, his family, his possessions, his health, was a gift from God. And even in loss, he chose to praise God. Job's statement is a powerful lesson in gratitude and acceptance. He understood that life is temporary and that all material things are transitory. By saying, "The Lord gave," he acknowledged that his blessings came from God. And by saying, "The Lord has taken away," he accepted that God, in his infinite wisdom, had the right to take back what he had given. Even so, Job chose to praise the Lord, demonstrating an unwavering faith. Job's response to tragedy is a testament to his integrity and devotion. He did not blame God for his losses, nor did he question divine justice. Instead, he turned to God in worship, strengthening his faith in the midst of adversity. Job teaches us that even in the most difficult times, we can find strength and comfort in faith, recognizing that God is in control and that his actions, no matter how mysterious, are part of a larger plan. As we continue to explore Job's life, we will see that his journey of suffering is far from over. But his initial response to the tragedy lays a foundation of faith and perseverance that will guide his future actions. We will continue to follow this incredible story of resilience and devotion. Second test of Job. Satan did not give up and suggested to God that if Job lost his health, he would curse God. God allowed Satan to smite Job with painful ulcers from head to toe. Job's life, which had already been marked by unimaginable tragedies, was about to face yet another test. The heavenly scene repeats itself, and again the angels present themselves before God. Among them, Satan also appears, ready for another challenge. God, knowing Job's integrity and faith, again mentions him with pride. "Has my servant Job noticed? There is no one on earth like him, upright and righteous, fearing God and shunning evil. He still maintains his integrity, even though you have instigated me against him to ruin him for no reason." Satan, however, does not give up. He replies, "Skin for skin. A man will give all he has for his own life. Stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and his bones, and he will certainly curse you to your face." Again, God allows Satan to test Job, but on one condition: "Well, he is in your hands, just spare his life." With this permission, Satan descends to inflict more suffering on Job, now in his own flesh. Before long, Job is stricken with painful ulcers that cover his entire body, from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. Picture the scene: Job, a once prosperous and healthy man, now covered in painful wounds and incessant itching. The ulcers are so unbearable that Job is forced to sit in the ashes and use a shard of pottery to scrape the wounds, trying to get some relief. The physical pain is intense, but the emotional and psychological suffering that accompanies this ordeal is equally overwhelming. Job, who had already lost all his possessions and children, now loses his health. His dignity, in the eyes of others, seems to crumble along with his body. As he sits amidst the ashes, his wife, also grieving from loss and grief, approaches him. In a moment of despair and frustration, she tells him, "Do you still maintain your integrity? Curse God and die." Her words reflect the deep anguish she too is feeling, unable to understand how such a righteous and God-fearing man can suffer so much. However, Job responds with unwavering wisdom and faith, "You speak like a fool. Will we accept God-given good, and not evil?" Even in the midst of such intense suffering, Job does not sin with his lips, maintaining his integrity and his faith in God. This second test of Job is an even more powerful testimony to his faith and resilience. As his health deteriorates and he faces constant pain, Job refuses to curse God. He continues to trust in wisdom and divine sovereignty, even though he does not understand the reasons for his suffering. The story of Job teaches us that true faith does not depend on favorable circumstances. Even when all seems lost, and the physical and emotional pain is overwhelming, faith in God can remain steadfast. Job shows us that even in the darkest of times, it is possible to maintain integrity and devotion, trusting that God is in control. As we continue to follow Job's journey, we will see how he navigates these extreme trials, always maintaining his faith and seeking answers to his suffering. Job's story is a powerful lesson in perseverance and trust in God, regardless of the circumstances. Job's wife's reaction. In the midst of suffering, Job's wife urged him to curse God and die. However, Job maintained his integrity, rebuking her and stating that he accepted both good and evil from God. Let us now focus on a particularly tense time in Job's life, where pain and suffering not only affect him but also those around him, including his wife. Picture the scene: Job, covered in painful ulcers, sitting amid the ashes, scraping his wounds with a pottery. Her misery is palpable, a sight of suffering that touches the heart of anyone who witnesses her. His wife, who has also lost everything, her children, her wealth, and now witnesses her husband's physical decline, is immersed in a sea of pain and despair. She, like Job, is struck by tragedy, but she reacts in a way that reveals the depth of her own anguish and frustration. In a moment of desperation, she approaches Job and, seeing the deplorable state he is in, she says, "Do you still keep your integrity? Curse God and die." Her words, loaded with pain and discouragement, reflect the sense of powerlessness and hopelessness she feels. To her, the situation seems so desperate that death seems to be a better relief than continuing to endure so much suffering. Job's reaction to this provocation is a true testament to his faith and character. Even in the midst of so much pain and suffering, he maintains his integrity and his devotion to God. Calmly and firmly, he replies, "You speak like a fool. Will we accept God-given good, and not evil?" With these words, Job reaffirms his belief in God's sovereignty. He recognizes that blessings and adversity are both parts of the divine plan, and that it is necessary to accept one with the same humility that we accept the other. Job understands that true faith is not only a passive acceptance of good, but also an unshakable trust during times of trial. Job's response to his wife is not just a rebuke, but a lesson in faith and resilience. He shows us that even when everything around us seems to be falling apart, it is possible to maintain faith and integrity. His ability to accept both good and evil as coming from God is a testament to his deep understanding of life and his devotion. This moment in Job's story is crucial, as it reveals the strength of his faith in contrast to his wife's despair. Job's wife, representing an understandable human reaction in the face of such pain, offers a perspective on how suffering can lead us to question even our faith. But Job, by maintaining his integrity, demonstrates that true faith can withstand the severest tests. As we continue to follow Job's journey, we will see how this inner strength and unwavering devotion sustains him through all adversity. The story of Job is not just about suffering, but about the human ability to maintain faith and hope, even in the most difficult circumstances. Let's continue this incredible journey, looking at how Job's faith will be tested and strengthened, and how his integrity will serve as an example for all of us. Job's friends arrive. 3 of Job's friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, came to comfort him. They sat with him in silence for 7 days and 7 nights, sharing his pain without saying a word. After losing everything and suffering in unimaginable ways, Job faced his trials with unwavering integrity and faith. However, his journey of suffering was still far from over. At this point in the story, 3 of his closest friends enter the picture, offering a glimpse of solidarity and friendship in times of deep anguish. Job's friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, upon hearing of the terrible calamities that had befallen Job, decided to come to him to comfort him. They traveled from their own lands, moved by friendship and compassion, to be by Job's side in his time of greatest need. These men weren't just casual acquaintances, they were close friends who had known Job for a long time and understood the gravity of the situation. Upon arriving in the land of Uz, where Job lived, they were shocked to see their friend in such a deplorable state. The imposing, prosperous figure they now knew was unrecognizable, sitting amid the ashes, covered in painful ulcers. The sight of Job, devastated by pain and sickness, moved them deeply. In a gesture of solidarity and respect, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar tore their garments and sprinkled ashes over their heads. These acts were traditional signs of grief and empathy, demonstrating that they shared in Job's grief and joined him in his affliction. The three friends approached Job and sat down next to him. And then, in a gesture of deep compassion and understanding, they stood silently by his side for 7 days and 7 nights. During all this time, no one said a word. They knew that sometimes, when the pain is so deep and words are insufficient, the simple act of being present can be the greatest consolation. The silence of Job's friends was not a meaningless emptiness, it was an expression of respect for Job's pain, an acknowledgement that there were no words that could ease his suffering. They were there to share his burden, to show that he was not alone, even if they could do nothing to change his situation. These 7 days and nights of silence were a powerful demonstration of solidarity. Imagine the impact of this: 3 men, sitting quietly next to their friend, sharing his pain without trying to offer simplistic explanations or solutions. This silence was loaded with meaning and showed the depth of friendship and empathy. The arrival of Job's friends marks a significant moment in history, highlighting the vital role of community and emotional support in times of crisis. Despite the words and actions that will follow, which will bring about much theological debate and discussion, this initial moment of silence and solidarity is a testament to true friendship and the power of simply being there for someone in suffering. As we continue to follow the story of Job, we will see how these interactions unfold and how Job, in the midst of his answers and questions, maintains his search for understanding and justice. The presence of your friends, however imperfect, is a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, companionship and empathy can bring a light of hope. We will continue to follow Job's journey, exploring the intense dialogues and deep reflections that emerge from this situation, as he and his friends try to find meaning in the midst of suffering. The speeches of the friends. When they began to speak, Job's friends argued that his suffering was the consequence of some hidden sin. They insisted that Job must confess his sins in order to be restored. After 7 days and 7 nights of silence, where the sympathetic presence of Job's friends was a powerful testimony of empathy, the time finally came when Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar felt the need to speak. The words they spoke, however, brought with them a new kind of challenge to Job, a challenge of divine understanding and justice. Job's friends, though well-intentioned, had a particular view of God's suffering and justice. They firmly believed in the idea that human suffering was always a direct consequence of sin. Based on this belief, they began to argue with Job, trying to convince him that he must have committed some serious sin to deserve such suffering. Eliphaz the Temanite was the first to speak. He began with a gentle approach, reminding Job of his godly and righteous past. Eliphaz suggested that Job should be patient and try to understand that God, being just, would never punish anyone for no reason. Remember now, who, being innocent, has never perished? And where were the upright destroyed? Eliphaz, based on a traditional view of divine retribution, insinuated that Job must have committed some secret sin in order to suffer so much. Bildad the Sweet took the floor next. His approach was more direct and severe. He argued that God is just and that he does not distort the right. Bildad claimed that Job's sons died due to their own sins, and that if Job really was innocent, God would have already restored his fortune. If thy children have sinned against him, he also hath cast them into the hand of their transgression. Bildad insisted that Job should turn to God, confess his sins, and seek restoration. Zophar the Naamathite completed the trio of speeches. He was the most impetuous and least compassionate of the three. Zophar accused Job of talking too much and trying to justify himself. He stated that Job's suffering was less than he deserved and that Job should seek God's mercy. If you will set your heart and stretch out your hands to him, if there is iniquity in your hand, cast it away from you. Zophar was adamant in his belief that repentance and confession were the only paths to restoration. Each of Job's friends, with their different personalities and ways of approaching the situation, was stuck with the idea that God's justice worked simply and directly, good is rewarded and evil is punished. They could not comprehend the complexity and depth of Job's suffering, nor could they consider the possibility that a righteous man could suffer without having committed any sin. For Job, listening to these talks was an additional burden in his suffering. He knew in his heart that he had committed no sin that would justify such a calamity. The words of his friends, instead of bringing consolation, brought confusion and additional pain. Job defended his integrity, insisting that he was innocent and that his suffering was not the result of hidden sins. I have heard many things like this. All of you are troublesome comforters. These debates between Job and his friends are central to the narrative, as they raise profound questions about the nature of suffering, divine justice, and true faith. Job, in the midst of his distress, cries out for a direct audience with God, longing for answers that his friends could not provide. The speeches of Job's friends show us that, although well-intentioned, we do not always understand the divine plan or the suffering of others. History challenges us to consider the depth of human suffering and the complexity of divine justice, reminding us that the answers are not always as simple as we would like. As we continue with Job's story, we will see how he continues to seek understanding and how, eventually, God answers his cries by bringing light and understanding about the mysteries of suffering and faith. The defense of Job. Job defended his innocence, stating that he had committed no sin that justified such pain. He questioned God's justice, but still maintained his faith. After enduring intense trials and facing the loss of his family, health, and wealth, Job faced a new challenge, defending his innocence in the face of his friends' implicit accusations and his own suffering. Job defended his innocence with impressive courage and conviction. He vehemently rejected the insinuations of his friends that his suffering was the result of hidden sins. Job was determined to prove that his faith and integrity remained unshaken, despite the devastating circumstances surrounding him. He argued that he had committed no sin that would justify the extreme suffering he was experiencing. In his defense, Job raised difficult questions about God's justice, questioning why the righteous suffered so much while the wicked prospered. Despite his questions, Job never abandoned his faith in God. He recognized divine sovereignty and, at the same time, expressed his bewilderment at the mysteries of life and pain. His faith was not naive, but deeply rooted in the conviction that God was just, even when circumstances seemed to indicate otherwise. During his debate with his friends, Job defended his position with solid arguments and an unshakable faith. He refused to accept the idea that his suffering was merely a punishment for secret sins, insisting that he deserved a direct answer from God to better understand his situation. Job's defense was not just a matter of justifying himself in the eyes of men, but of maintaining his integrity before God. He sought not only relief from his suffering, but a deeper understanding of the purpose behind his trials. By the end of his defense, Job remained steadfast in his faith, recognizing that the path to true understanding was beyond his own human capabilities. He eagerly awaited God's answer, hoping that it would bring light to the mysteries that haunted him. Job's defense was not only an act of personal bravery but a powerful testimony of perseverance and confidence in the midst of adversity. Her story continues to inspire and challenge those who face doubt and hardship in their own lives, reminding us of the importance of a robust faith and a sincere pursuit of truth. Thus we conclude this chapter of Job's life, where his fervent defense reminds us that even in the darkest of times, we can cling to hope and trust in God. May their courage and determination inspire us to seek truth and justice, even when the answers seem far away. Elihu, the young friend. A fourth friend, Elihu, who had remained silent, finally spoke. He offered a different perspective, suggesting that Job's suffering could be a form of discipline and purification. After the intense speeches of Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, a fourth friend, hitherto silent, decided it was time to contribute his unique perspective on Job's situation. Elihu, a young man full of zeal and conviction, felt that he needed to offer his own reflections in the face of Job's seemingly unjust suffering. Elihu was not just a casual observer of the situation, he was deeply disturbed by the way Job and his friends had argued up to that point. He realized that something essential was missing from the previous discussions. With a heart full of compassion and an inquisitive mind, Elihu prepared to speak. Elihu began with respect and humility, acknowledging the age and experience of Job and his friends. He explained that he had waited patiently while the elders spoke, expecting to hear wisdom that had not been shared until then. I waited, because they didn't speak, because they stopped, and didn't answer anymore. Elihu showed that he was ready to add his voice to the debate, bringing a new perspective that he believed was important. He then presented his view on Job's suffering, suggesting that God uses suffering as a form of discipline and correction for his children. Elihu did not see Job's suffering as a mere consequence of specific sin, as his friends had suggested, but as an opportunity for Job to learn and grow spiritually. That they may turn a man away from what he has done, and hide the pride of man. He argued that suffering could serve as a warning for Job to examine his heart and seek greater understanding of God and himself. Elihu also highlighted the greatness of God, reminding Job of the immensity and complexity of the Creator. He challenged Job to consider how God speaks through the events of human life, including through suffering. For he layeth his work upon man, and all men behold it from afar. Elihu not only offered theories but encouraged Job to contemplate the deeper purpose behind his suffering. Although Elihu spoke with fervor and conviction, his words were also an attempt to bring clarity and a new perspective to the debate that had hitherto been dominated by the more traditional views of his friends. He positioned himself as someone who wanted to help Job understand the meaning of suffering in a way that was both constructive and spiritually enriching. To Job, Elihu's words were like a breath of fresh air. Although he was still struggling to understand why God allowed so much suffering in his life, Elihu's perspective made him reflect on the divine purpose behind the tribulations. It is understood that above heaven the division of her, and her light upon the ends of the earth. These words resonated deeply with Job, provoking new questions and new hopes in his heart. Elihu's speech represents a turning point in Job's story, marking the beginning of a new phase of discussion and understanding. As he and his friends continue to explore the meaning of suffering and divine justice, we are curious to see how God will respond to Job's cries and how he will find peace and renewal after so many tribulations. We will continue to follow Job's journey, observing how his interactions with his friends and his own reflections will lead him to a deeper understanding of himself and his relationship with God. God's answer. God finally answered Job from the midst of a whirlwind, challenging him to understand the mysteries of the universe and the complexity of creation. God highlighted his sovereignty and wisdom, as well as the limitation of human understanding. After all the speeches of his friends and Elihu, Job continued to cry out for an answer from God. He wanted to understand the reason for his suffering and sought a direct encounter with the Creator. Finally, his wish was granted when God decided to speak. God manifested himself from the midst of a whirlwind, a powerful representation of his majestic and imposing presence. The whirlwind symbolized not only God's arrival but also the magnitude of his own nature. Job, in the face of this manifestation, felt small and humble, aware of the vastness and grandeur of the being that was now speaking to him. God began by reminding Job of his sovereignty and wisdom. He questioned Job about who had set the boundaries of the sea and who had created the dawn. "Where were you when I founded the earth? Let me know, if you have understanding." God was challenging Job to recognize that human understanding is limited in the face of the vastness of his designs and the complexity of his creation. He continued to question Job, asking him about control of the heavens, provision for wild beasts, and dominion over the behemoth and leviathan. These creatures represented strength and greatness that could only be the work of God himself. Or he who opened the channel for the flood, and the way for the lightning of thunder, to rain on the earth, where there is no one, and in the wilderness, where there is no man? Not only did God challenge Job with questions, but he also offered him a deeper understanding of his sovereignty and purpose. He was showing Job that human suffering, though mysterious to human eyes, is part of a larger, more comprehensive plan. "Now therefore take with you 7 bullocks and 7 rams, and go to my servant Job, and offer a burnt offering for you, and my servant Job will pray for you, because I will indeed accept him." After God had finished speaking, Job responded with humility and repentance. He recognized his limitation before the majesty of God and repented of having questioned the divine designs. "Therefore I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes." God's response not only brought clarity about Job's suffering but also restored his faith and trust in God's goodness and purpose. This divine response marks the climax of Job's story. It is the moment when he finally finds peace and understanding in the midst of his suffering. God's answer not only answers Job's questions, but also reveals the depth of God's love and wisdom, which transcends human understanding. For those who follow Job's story, this response from God teaches us about the importance of faith and trust in times of difficulty. It reminds us that even when we don't understand God's plans, we can trust that He is sovereign and that His love for us is unwavering. With God's response, we end Job's journey with a deep sense of wonder and gratitude for the way God cares for His children, even in the most difficult of times. May Job's story continue to inspire and strengthen our own faith in God and His designs for our lives. The humility of Job. After hearing God's voice, Job repented in dust and ashes, recognizing God's greatness and his own insignificance. He admitted that he had talked about things he didn't understand. After the impactful encounter with God, Job was deeply touched and transformed. The powerful voice that echoed from the whirlwind brought not only answers, but also a revelation of divine sovereignty and wisdom that surpasses any human understanding. Job, in his humility, recognized the magnitude of God and the limitation of his own understanding. Job repented in dust and ashes, a symbolic gesture of his humility before God. He lamented that he had spoken in an imprudent and presumptuous manner about the divine designs. Wherefore, I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes. This gesture was not only an outward expression of grief, but also a profound acknowledgement of their dependence on God and the need to accept the mysteries of His will. He acknowledged his limitation, admitting that his previous words were based on a limited and imperfect understanding of God's ways. Job had questioned God's justice, but now he understood that true wisdom lies in accepting God's designs with humility and faith. Who is he that hideth counsel without understanding? Therefore I spoke of what I did not understand, things that were wonderfully to me that I didn't understand. Job's humility was a pivotal point in his spiritual journey, as it marked not only his recognition of God's greatness but also his willingness to submit to His will. After the encounter with God, Job experienced a profound inner transformation. Not only did he accept the lessons God taught him, but he also gave himself completely to divine care, even in the face of so much suffering and loss. This experience further strengthened Job's faith, showing him that suffering was not a sign of abandonment, but part of a larger, deeper plan that he could not fully grasp. His humility before God reflected a renewed trust in the love and wisdom of the Creator. For those listening to Job's story, his humility offered a powerful lesson about the importance of trusting in God, even when the paths seem inexplicable and difficult. Job's journey was not only a story of perseverance but also a testament to how humility and faith can sustain someone during life's darkest times. With Job now humbly repentant and renewed in spirit, we continue to follow his journey, eager to see how God will restore all things to him. His story is not only an account of suffering but also of hope and redemption through unwavering faith in God. The restoration of Job. God rebuked Job's friends for not telling the truth about him, as Job had done. Afterward, God restored Job's fortune, giving him twice what he had before. Job had 7 other sons and 3 daughters, and lived another 140 years, seeing his descendants to the 4th generation. After experiencing numerous trials and learning profound lessons about faith, humility, and trust in God, Job finally experienced the complete restoration of his blessings. God rebuked Job's friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, for not speaking correctly about him, contrary to what Job had done. Although they had good intentions in comforting Job, their words did not reflect God's true nature. God instructed the friends to offer sacrifices and seek Job's intercession so that their faults would be forgiven. After rebuking his friends, God restored Job's prosperity in an extraordinary way. He gave Job twice as much as he had lost, twice as many cattle, sheep, camels, and donkeys as he had owned before. This divine generosity was a clear demonstration of God's favor and mercy toward his faithful servant. In addition to material restoration, Job was also blessed with more sons and daughters. He had 7 other sons and 3 daughters, bringing his family to a total of 14 sons and 3 daughters. These new sons not only symbolized the restoration of Job's family life but also represented the continuity of his lineage and God's blessing on his offspring. Furthermore, Job lived another 140 years after his restoration, witnessing the blessing of seeing his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren grow up and prosper. He lived to see the fourth generation of his offspring, enjoying a long and blessed life to the end of his days. The story of Job, from the beginning of his prosperity to the complete restoration of his blessings, is a powerful testimony to how faith in God can bring restoration and renewal even in the most difficult times. Job not only regained his material possessions, but he also experienced a profound spiritual and emotional restoration. For those who hear her story, she offers a message of hope and perseverance. It teaches us that even in the face of the greatest adversity, we can trust in God's goodness and faithfulness. Job is an example of how faith and integrity are rewarded, not necessarily with a trouble-free life, but with God's constant presence and loving care. With Job's restoration, we end his epic journey with a sense of gratitude and admiration for God's wonderful works. May her story continue to inspire and strengthen the faith of those who hear it, always reminding us of the transformative power of trust in God. Conclusion: the lessons of Job's life. The story of Job teaches us about God's sovereignty, the importance of faith and patience, and how suffering can purify us and strengthen our relationship with the Creator. Job remained faithful despite his doubts and questions, and was blessed for his perseverance. I hope you enjoyed this journey through Job's life. His story is a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, faith and integrity can guide us through trials. Job's journey is one of the most inspiring and uplifting found in the Bible, filled with profound teachings about faith, perseverance, and trust in God. The story of Job teaches us about God's sovereignty, revealing his absolute authority over all things. Despite the adversities and challenges Job faced, God was in control of every moment, guiding him through the purifying fire of trial to a place of greater understanding and spiritual strengthening. Job shows us the importance of faith and patience. Even when all seemed lost and meaningless, Job clung to his unwavering faith in God. He did not give up, even when faced with devastating losses and unfathomable pain. His patience was tested to the limit, but he continued to trust in God's plan, even though he did not fully understand God's purposes. Job's suffering teaches us that it can purify us and strengthen our relationship with the Creator. Although it initially seemed like an unjust punishment, Job's suffering proved to be an opportunity for deep spiritual growth. He emerged from the dark valley of pain with an even more robust faith and a deeper understanding of God's nature. Job remained faithful despite his doubts and questions. His journey was not easy, but his perseverance was rewarded. God restored his blessings and rewarded him abundantly for his faithfulness. Job's story is a powerful reminder that even in life's most difficult moments, we must rely on God's love and wisdom. We end our journey through Job's life with a deep sense of gratitude for the lessons he taught us. His story continues to resonate through the centuries, inspiring those facing trials to remain steadfast in their faith and trust in God's sovereign plan for their lives. May the story of Job be a source of encouragement and hope for all of us, reminding us that with God by our side, we can face any challenge and emerge stronger than ever before. May the lessons of Job's life guide us on our own journey of faith and strengthen us in times of trouble. May we learn from his courage, his perseverance, and most of all, his unwavering trust in the God who never fails. I hope you have been enriched by this journey through the life of Job. May her story continue to inspire and impact lives, bringing comfort to afflicted hearts and renewing the faith of those who seek to understand God's mysterious ways. Thus we conclude, with gratitude and reverence, the complete story of Job's life. May we apply its lessons in our own lives, living with faith and hope at all times.